You know, those stories about people who've stared death in the face and come back with tales that would make your hair stand on end. Get ready because we're about to take a trip to the other side and back. Now, I'm not talking about that time you choked on a chicken bone and saw your life flash before your eyes. I'm talking about those full-blown, out-of-body tunnel of light experiences that leave folks wondering if they accidentally wandered onto the set of a heavenly game show. We're talking about seeing the light, meeting their maker, and maybe even getting a sneak peek at what's waiting for us on the other side. So grab yourself a glass of sweet tea, settle in, and get ready to explore the afterlife. Let's go. Welcome to Screamville. Now let's kick things off with a true story that'll make your jaws drop. It's about a woman named Vicky Noratuk. Now, Vicky was born blind, but then one day she had herself a near-death experience. And guess what? She could see everything. I know, it sounds crazy, but you see, during her NDE, Vicky said she left her body and could suddenly see everything. Herself, the room, the whole shebang. She even described colors, which is like me trying to explain astrophysics. Poor thing probably thought she'd woken up in a whole new dimension. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I suddenly woke up and could see after a lifetime in the dark, I'd probably think I was having a bad plate of grits. But Vicky, she took it all in stride. She described colors like she'd been seeing them her whole life, even though she had no earthly idea what those colors actually looked like. Can you imagine that? Describing the vibrant red of a fire truck or the deep blue of the ocean, all from a blind person's perspective? It's enough to make your head spin. Now, Vicky's story isn't an isolated incident. A whole passel of people have reported seeing during their NDEs, even if they were blind as a bat in their everyday lives. And that's where Dr. Kenneth Ring comes in. He's a researcher who decided to dig into this whole blind people seeing during NDEs thing. Dr. Ring interviewed a whole bunch of folks who were blind from birth and had NDEs. And you know what he found? A good chunk of them described having visual experiences just like Vicky. They saw colors, shapes, and even recognized people they knew, which, let's be honest, is more than I can do at a family reunion sometimes. Now, you know how it is. You tell someone you saw Elvis at the Piggly Wiggly, and they'll look at you like you've grown a second head. Well, the same goes for NDEs. Some folks, especially those brainy types in lab coats, reckon it's all just a bunch of hooey cooked up by our noggins. They figure our brains go haywire when we're close to kicking the bucket, creating all sorts of crazy hallucinations. And, I gotta admit, it's a thought that's crossed my mind a time or two. I mean, if our brains can convince us that fruitcake is an acceptable dessert, then who knows what else they're capable of. See, those scientists, they've got all sorts of fancy explanations for NDEs. They talk about how, when we're close to death, our brains get all out of whack. Oxygen levels plummet, chemicals go berserk, and the whole thing turns into a disco party gone wrong. They say these changes can cause all sorts of weird sensations, like feeling like you're floating outside your body or seeing a bright light. Heck, I get those feelings just thinking about my wife's cooking. But then, you have those people who believe NDEs are the real deal, a genuine glimpse into the afterlife. They say it's our soul's way of taking a test drive before heading to the great beyond. And let me tell you, those stories are enough to make you want to grab your hymn book and start practicing your harp playing. They talk about meeting their maker, reuniting with loved ones who've passed on, and feeling a sense of peace and love that's more powerful than a mama bear's hug. Is it just our brains messing with us? Or is it a sign that there's something more beyond this mortal coil? See, that's what makes this whole thing so darn fascinating. It's a mystery that's captivated folks for centuries, and it isn't going away anytime soon. So, are you ready? We're about to dive deeper into this rabbit hole. Now, when it comes to NDEs, there's one thing that always gets people talking. Those out-of-body experiences. You know, where you feel yourself floating above your own body, looking down like you're watching a rerun of your own life. Talk about awkward, right? Imagine this. You're lying there in the hospital bed, heart monitor doing the jitterbug, and suddenly, whoosh, you're up on the ceiling, looking down at yourself like, well, ain't that a sight? Now, some people say they can zip around like a hummingbird on Red Bull during these out-of-body experiences. They're floating through walls, visiting loved ones, maybe even sneaking a peek at next week's lottery numbers. Who knows, maybe they're even getting into a little heavenly mischief while they're at it. I can just imagine it now. Hold on, St. Peter, I gotta run down to Earth real quick and see if my team won the game. But here's the kicker. A lot of people who've had these out-of-body experiences say they can see and hear things that were going on while they were, well, technically dead. They'll come back and tell the doctors and nurses exactly what they were saying, what they were wearing, even what color socks they had on. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I'm not paying that much attention to folks' socks when I'm alive, let alone when I'm supposed to be pushing up daisies. Of course, the scientists, they've got an explanation for this too. They say it's all about how our brains process information even when we're on the fritz. They say our brains are like those fancy new computers, always whirring and clicking, even when the screen's gone dark. So, even when we're flatlining, our brains might still be picking up on things, storing them away for later. But me, I like to think there's a little more to it than that. I like to think that maybe, just maybe, those out-of-body experiences are a little glimpse into what our souls are capable of. Now, speaking of out-of-body experiences, let's talk about those people who say they can travel to far-off places with just the power of their minds. They call it astral projection, and it's like something out of a superhero comic book. These astral projectors, they say they can send their consciousness soaring through the cosmos, visiting distant galaxies, maybe even popping in on their neighbors without having to put on pants. Now that's what I call convenience. Now I don't know about y'all, but I can barely remember where I left my car keys, let alone project my consciousness across the universe. But hey, who am I to judge? If people want to spend their time exploring the astral plane, more power to them. Just as long as they don't accidentally wander into the wrong dimension and bring back any interdimensional critters. I've seen enough horror movies to know how that usually turns out. But all jokes aside, there are some folks who take astral projection very seriously. They say it's a way to connect with their spiritual side, to explore the hidden realms of existence, maybe even to make contact with beings from other worlds. And who knows, maybe they're right. After all, they say the universe is a vast and mysterious place, full of wonders we can't even begin to imagine. But me, I'm perfectly content to explore the universe from the comfort of my own couch, thank you very much. I'll leave the astral adventures to the experts. Besides, I'm pretty sure my wife would notice if my spirit suddenly went missing while I was off gallivanting through the cosmos. She's got a sixth sense for that kind of thing. Now, if there's one thing that screams near-death experience, it's got to be that whole tunnel of light thing, you know? Where people say they're whizzing through a dark tunnel like a runaway train to the pearly gates. And at the end, there's this brilliant light shining brighter than a disco ball at a flea market. It's like the universe's way of saying, hey, welcome to the afterlife, grab a harp and a pair of wings, we're having a potluck. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I saw a tunnel of light at the end of my life, I'd probably think I was hallucinating from eating too much spicy barbecue. But hey, who am I to judge? Maybe it's real, maybe it's not. But one thing's for sure, it makes for a heck of a story. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good afterlife adventure tale? But seriously, people, this tunnel of light thing has got folks scratching their heads for centuries. Is it a real phenomenon, or is it just our brains playing tricks on us in our final moments? Some folks think it's our consciousness transitioning to another dimension, while others think it's just a flood of endorphins making us see things. Me, I'm keeping an open mind. After all, they say stranger things have happened, but I'm not gonna lie. If I ever find myself hurtling towards a tunnel of light, I'm gonna be hoping there's a good buffet on the other side. A man's gotta eat, even in the afterlife. All right, let's mosey on over to the science side of things and see what those lab coat-wearing fellas have to say about NDEs. Now, these scientists, they love their explanations, and they've got a whole passel of them when it comes to these near-death shenanigans. They'll tell you it's all about brain chemistry, neurons firing like popcorn, and enough scientific jargon to make your head spin. They're like the ultimate party poopers, trying to convince us that our heavenly visions are nothing more than a chemical imbalance. Now, I'm not saying they're wrong, mind you. I'm just saying sometimes it's more fun to embrace the mystery, you know? Like, who's to say that our brains aren't just picking up on something real, something beyond our current understanding? Maybe those neurons are like little antennas, tuning into the cosmic radio waves of the afterlife. Or maybe, just maybe, our brains are more powerful than we give them credit for, capable of tapping into realms we never even dreamed of. But hey, I'm just a simple country boy with a microphone and a healthy dose of skepticism. I'll leave the scientific deep dives to the experts, but one thing's for sure. Those scientists, they've got their work cut out for them trying to explain away something as wild and wonderful as an NDE. It's like trying to explain the taste of grandma's apple pie. You just got to experience it for yourself. So, let's take a gander at some of the scientific theories they've cooked up, shall we? Just remember to take it all with a grain of salt, or maybe a pinch of sugar if you prefer your science with a side of sweetness. After all, life's too short to take everything so seriously, even when we're talking about the afterlife. Alright, so one of the main theories those science buffs like to throw around is that NDEs are nothing more than our brains going bonkers when we're on the verge of shuffling off this mortal coil. They say that when our bodies are under extreme stress, like when we're having a heart attack or getting chased by a swarm of bees, our brains go into overdrive, releasing all sorts of crazy chemicals. It's like our brains are having a wild party and everyone's invited, even the weird neighbors we try to avoid. Now these chemicals, they're like the life of the party, but they can also be a little unpredictable. They can make us see things, hear things, and feel things that ain't actually there. It's like watching a B-movie marathon after eating a whole bag of gummy bears. Things get a little fuzzy around the edges. So, those scientists, they figure that all those classic NDE experiences like the tunnel of light, the out-of-body floating, and the meeting with dearly departed Aunt Mildred are just our brains trying to make sense of all the chaos. And you know what? They might be right. Our brains are complicated critters, full of more twists and turns than a back road in the bayou. But here's the thing. Even if NDEs are just our brains playing tricks on us, that don't make them any less real to the people experiencing them. I mean, if I thought I was floating towards a heavenly buffet, I wouldn't want someone telling me it was all just a chemical imbalance. I'd be too busy loading up my plate with ambrosia and angel food cake. So while those scientists are busy trying to dissect the brain and figure out all its secrets, I'm going to keep an open mind. After all, the human mind is a powerful thing, capable of both amazing feats and hilarious misfires. And who knows? Maybe those misfires are just our brains trying to tell us something we're not quite ready to hear yet. Or maybe it's just the gummy bears talking. Now, another theory those science sleuths like to toss around is that NDEs are caused by something called temporal lobe seizures. Now, before you start picturing your brain doing the tango, let me explain. The temporal lobe, see, is that part of your brain that's in charge of all sorts of funky stuff like memory, language, and even those weird dreams you have after eating too much cheese before bed. It's like the creative center of your noggin, always cooking up something interesting. Now, sometimes this temporal lobe, it gets a little overexcited like a hound dog at a flea circus. And when that happens, people can have what's called a temporal lobe seizure. And guess what? One of the side effects of these seizures can be experiences that are eerily similar to NDEs. People report feeling detached from their bodies, seeing strange lights, and even having religious experiences. It's like their brains are accidentally dialing up the afterlife hotline. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who's had an NDE was having a seizure, but it's something to consider, especially if you're prone to having your brain do the jitterbug every now and then. Of course, even if NDEs are caused by seizures, it don't necessarily mean they ain't real in some way. Maybe those seizures are just opening a door in our minds, allowing us to peek into another dimension. Or maybe, just maybe, our brains are wired to connect with something bigger than ourselves, even if it's just for a few fleeting moments. After all, we humans, we're curious critters, always searching for answers, for meaning, for a little bit of magic in this sometimes mundane world. And who knows, maybe those temporal lobe seizures are just the universe's way of giving us a little taste of something more. Now, hold on to your hats, folks, because we're about to delve into the psychological side of things. They say that NDEs might be our brain's way of coping with extreme stress and trauma. Think of it like this. You're about to crash your car, right? Your brain goes into survival mode, pumping out adrenaline. Some psychologists think NDEs are a survival mechanism on a grander scale. Our brains might create peaceful experiences to calm us down. It's like watching a highlight reel of your life. I'd much rather have a peaceful adventure than a panic attack, wouldn't you? So those are just a couple of the psychological theories about NDEs. Are they right? Are they wrong? Who knows? And hey, maybe that's what makes life so darn interesting. All right, now we're about to go into some deep waters, so grab your floaties, and let's talk about why some Christians aren't exactly doing the jitterbug over NDEs. See, the Bible, it's kind of like the instruction manual for life and the hereafter. And some of those NDEs just don't quite line up with what the good book says. Now, I'm no theologian, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I'm going to try to break this down as best I can. Just bear with me, y'all. One of the main things that gives some Christians pause is that whole coming back from the dead thing. See, the Bible, it kind of paints a pretty clear picture of what happens when we kick the bucket. We face judgment, we go to our eternal reward, and that's that. No do-overs, no mulligans, no coming back for a second helping of pecan pie. So, when people start talking about taking trips to heaven and back before they've even finished their earthly journey, it can raise a few eyebrows and maybe even a few, "Are you sure you weren't just dreaming about that angel, Bubba?" It's understandable why some people might be a little hesitant to embrace them wholeheartedly, especially when they seem to contradict what they believe to be the Word of God. After all, faith, it's a powerful thing, and sometimes it requires us to hold on to what we believe, even when we don't have all the answers. But hey, that's the beauty of faith, ain't it? It's about trusting in something bigger than ourselves, even when we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. And maybe, just maybe, those NDEs are just another piece of that puzzle. A piece we're still trying to figure out where it fits. Or maybe, like a plate of Grandma's mystery casserole, it's best not to ask too many questions and just enjoy the ride. Now, another thing that makes some Christians a mite nervous about NDEs is that whole Judgment Day thing. See, the Bible, it talks about how when we die, we're going to stand before the big man himself and give an account for our lives. It's like the ultimate performance review, only with eternal consequences. So, when people start talking about getting a sneak peek at the afterlife before their number's called, it's like they're trying to cut in line at the pearly gates. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I knew I had to face judgment for every little white lie and misplaced donut I'd ever committed, I wouldn't be in any hurry to get that show on the road. I'd be down here trying to rack up as many good deeds as I could, like a squirrel trying to hoard nuts before winter. But hey, that's just me. Maybe some people are just more eager to get their heavenly report card than others. But all jokes aside, it's a serious topic, this whole Judgment Day business. And it's one that people have been wrestling with for centuries. Is it something to fear? Is it something to look forward to? Is there a heavenly dress code? These are the questions that keep philosophers and theologians up at night, and probably a few insomniac squirrels too. But for now, all we can do is trust that the big man upstairs has got a plan, and that plan probably involves a whole lot less paperwork than the DMV. And if we happen to get a glimpse of that plan through an NDE, well, maybe that's just a little bonus, a little something to tide us over until the main event. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a sign that we've been watching too many Hallmark movies. Heaven for everyone, hold your horses, says the Bible. Now, here's another thing that gives some Christians pause about NDEs. That whole everyone goes to heaven vibe that some folks report. See, the Bible, it's pretty clear that not everyone gets a free pass to the pearly gates. There's a whole lot of talk about sin, redemption, and that whole narrow is the path thing. So when people start coming back from NDEs, talking about how heaven's got an open door policy and everyone's invited to the celestial hoedown, it can cause a bit of a theological traffic jam. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I was in charge of heaven, I'd probably be a little more selective about who got past the velvet rope. I mean, I wouldn't want a bunch of people crashing the party who didn't even RSVP, especially if they were gonna hog the dessert table. But hey, that's just me. Maybe the big man upstairs is more forgiving than I am. He's got a reputation to uphold after all. But all jokes aside, it's a tough one, this whole heaven and hell business. It's not like we can just call up the afterlife hotline and ask for a brochure, you know? We have to rely on faith, tradition, and maybe a little bit of common sense. And if some people come back from NDEs saying that heaven's more like a love fest than a judgment zone, well, maybe that's just their experience. Who are we to judge? But one thing's for sure, if heaven is real, and if we do get to go there someday, I'm going to be sure to pack my dancing shoes. Because if those NDEs are anything to go by, it's going to be one heck of a party. And if it turns out I was wrong about the whole RSVP thing, well, I'll just blame it on my earthly ignorance. After all, everybody's got to learn sometime, even in the afterlife. All right, now we're getting into some spooky territory, so hold on to your hats and let's talk about the possibility that some of these NDEs might be the work of the old Scratch himself. Now, I know it sounds crazy, right? Like something out of one of them horror movies where the villains of ventriloquist dummy come to life. But hear me out on this one, y'all. See, the Bible, it talks about how the devil, he's a real trickster, always trying to lead folks astray with false promises and shiny distractions. He's like that slick-talking salesman who comes to your door peddling miracle cures and timeshares in a swamp. And some people, they believe that NDEs, especially those ones that seem a little too good to be true, might be one of the devil's sneakiest tricks yet. Could NDEs be a demonic illusion? I'm just saying it's something to consider. especially if you're dealing with an NDE that's got more red flags than a communist parade. Like, if your NDE involves the devil himself offering you a lifetime supply of chocolate chip cookies in exchange for your soul, well, that's probably a sign that you need to renegotiate the terms and conditions. But all jokes aside, it's a scary thought, this whole idea of the devil messing with our minds, especially when we're at our most vulnerable. But hey, that's why we got to keep our wits about us and not believe everything we see or hear, no matter how convincing it might seem. Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and sometimes it's just plain old-fashioned creepy. Now, speaking of the devil's trickery, some folks believe that he's not above using a little bit of Hollywood magic to pull off his schemes. See, the Bible talks about how Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light, all shiny and pure on the outside, but rotten to the core on the inside. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. It might look a little better, but it's still a pig. So some people figure that some of these NDEs, especially those ones where people report meeting angelic beings or getting messages from beyond the grave, might be the devil's way of pulling the wool over our eyes, so to speak. He's like that con artist who shows up at your door wearing a fake ID and a charming smile, ready to sweet-talk you out of your life savings. Now, I'm not saying every angel you meet in an NDE is actually the devil in disguise. I'm just saying, it's probably best to get a second opinion, maybe even a third or fourth, before you go sign in any contracts or hand in over your PIN number. After all, you never can be too careful, especially when you're dealing with matters of the eternal soul. But all jokes aside, this whole idea of spiritual deception, it's a serious matter. It's about protecting ourselves from those who might try to take advantage of our beliefs, our hopes, and our fears. And it's about remembering that not everything that glitters is gold, and not everyone wearing a halo is actually on our side. So stay vigilant. Be afraid to ask questions, because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Now, another reason why some Christians are a little leery of NDEs is that they put a lot of stock in faith, and faith ain't always about what we can see, hear, or touch. It's about trusting in something bigger than ourselves, even when we don't have all the answers. It's like trusting that your mama's recipe for sweet tea is going to turn out all right, even if you accidentally doubled the sugar. You got to have faith. And for some Christians, that faith, it's rooted in the Bible, in the teachings of their church, in the traditions they were raised with. And when those beliefs seem to clash with the personal experiences of folks who've had NDEs, well, it can create a bit of a dilemma. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It just don't quite work that way. Now, I ain't saying that faith and experience can't coexist. I'm just saying sometimes they require a little bit of reconciliation, a little bit of giving and taking. It's like trying to get your in-laws to agree on something. It takes time, patience, and maybe a little bit of divine intervention. But hey, that's what makes life interesting, ain't it? The constant push and pull between what we believe and what we experience. So, for those Christians who find themselves wrestling with the implications of NDEs, my advice is this: keep the faith, folks. Trust in what you believe, but don't be afraid to ask questions, to seek answers, to explore the mysteries of the universe. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries are the ones we make within ourselves. Now, let's be honest, folks, this whole NDE thing, it's a real head-scratcher. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, no magic decoder ring that's going to unlock all the secrets of the afterlife. It's all a matter of perspective, really. Kind of like that dress that went viral a while back. Some folks saw it one way, some people saw it another, and nobody could agree on what color it actually was. See, some people hear about these NDEs, and they're ready to pack their bags for heaven, convinced that they've got a first-class ticket to the pearly gates. Others, they're more skeptical, figuring it's all just a bunch of hooey cooked up by our overactive imaginations. And then there's those people who fall somewhere in between, the ones who are open to the possibility of something more, but not quite ready to put all their eggs in the afterlife basket just yet. And you know what? That's perfectly all right. We all got to find our own path, our own way of making sense of this crazy, beautiful, and often downright confusing thing called life. It's like trying to pick the best flavor of ice cream. There's no right or wrong answer, just personal preference. So whether you believe in NDEs or not, whether you think they're a glimpse into the afterlife or just a brain fart, the important thing is to keep an open mind, to be respectful of other people's beliefs, and to never stop searching for answers, because sometimes the journey is just as important as the destination. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the spiritual side of NDEs, and why some Christians are a little hesitant to jump on the heavenly bandwagon. It's a complex issue full of nuances, interpretations, and more questions than answers. Kind of like trying to assemble a piece of IKEA furniture without the instructions. You might end up with something that resembles a bookcase, but it probably ain't going to be pretty. But that's the beauty of it all, isn't it? The mystery, the intrigue, the endless possibilities. Because if we knew all the answers, if life was just a straight line from point A to point B, well, wouldn't that be kind of boring? It's like eating plain oatmeal for breakfast every single day. It might be good for you, but it ain't exactly going to set your soul on fire. So, whether you approach NDEs from a place of faith, science, or somewhere in between, the important thing is to approach it with an open heart, an inquisitive mind, and maybe a healthy dose of humor. Because let's face it, folks, life's too short to take everything so seriously, even the afterlife. So keep searching, keep wondering, and keep laughing along the way. Because who knows? Maybe the answers to life's greatest mysteries are right under our noses, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for us to open our eyes and see them. Or maybe, just maybe, they're buried in a secret vault guarded by a three-headed dog. Hey, a man can dream, can't he? Now, y'all ever noticed how most folks who come back from an NDE, they're all smiles and sunshine, like they just won a lifetime supply of banana pudding? It's enough to make a fella wonder if they're pumping happy gas into those hospital ventilators. Well, turns out, there's a whole passel of reasons why positive NDEs seem to be more common than a fly at a picnic. And no, it ain't just because those heavenly hosts are handing out Prozac with the angel wings. See, those brainy types in the lab coats, they've been studying this phenomenon for years, trying to figure out why some folks come back from the brink talking about love and light, while others come back looking like they just saw a ghost riding a John Deere. And while they ain't got all the answers yet, they've come up with some pretty interesting theories. So grab yourself a glass of sweet tea, settle in, and let's explore the sunny side of the NDE street. Now, I ain't saying that negative NDEs don't happen. They do, and we'll get to those hair-raising tales in a bit. But for now, let's focus on the positive, the uplifting, the kind of stories that make you want to believe in a little something more, even if it's just the power of a good hug. Because let's face it, the world could use a little more sunshine and a little less doom and gloom. So because we're about to dive headfirst into the world of happy NDEs, where the vibes are good, the music's even better, and the only thing missing is a plate of Grandma's famous pecan pie. And hey, if we learn a little something about ourselves along the way, well, that's just a bonus. Now, ain't that something? All right, so first up on our NDE joyride, let's talk about brain chemicals. Now, I know what you're thinking. Brain chemicals? That sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry. But trust me on this one. When it comes to NDEs, brain chemicals are the life of the party. See, when we're facing a life or death situation, our brains, they go into overdrive like a squirrel trying to bury a pecan in a hurricane. And one of the ways our brains deal with all that stress is by releasing a whole cocktail of chemicals, kind of like a bartender trying to invent a new signature drink. Now, some of these chemicals, they're like the party animals of the brain. They get the good times rolling, making us feel happy, relaxed, and maybe even a little bit invincible. And one of the biggest party animals in the brain's chemical cabinet is a little something called endorphins. You know those endorphins, right? Those feel-good chemicals that give you that runner's high after a good jog or make you want to dance in the kitchen while baking cookies. Yeah, those guys. Well, turns out endorphins, they ain't just for jogging and baking. They also play a big role in how our brains respond to pain, stress, and even near-death experiences. See, when we're under extreme duress, our brains, they flood our systems with endorphins, kind of like turning the emotional volume down from a 10 to a 2. It's like our brains are saying, look, I know things are getting a little hairy here, so how about we just chill out, listen to some smooth jazz, and pretend we're on a beach somewhere. And some scientists, they believe that this endorphin rush might be one of the reasons why so many NDEs are positive. It's like our brains are giving us a little going-away present, a final hurrah before we shuffle off this mortal coil. Or maybe, just maybe, those endorphins are helping us tap into something real, something beyond our current understanding of the universe. Who knows? Brain science is a wild ride, y'all. Now let's mosey on over from the science lab to the cultural cookout and talk about how our upbringing might be coloring our NDE experiences. See, from the time we're knee-high to a grasshopper, we're bombarded with stories, beliefs, and images about what happens after we kick the bucket. It's like a never-ending game of telephone. with each generation whispering their own version of the afterlife into the next generation's ear. And depending on where you grew up and who you listened to, those stories could be as different as grits and gravy. Some folks, they grow up believing in a pearly white heaven with streets paved with gold and angels strumming harps on every corner. Others, they grow up hearing tales of a fiery underworld where sinners roast for eternity and the devil's always looking for a new dance partner. Now, I ain't saying that one belief is right and the other's wrong. I'm just saying our cultural and religious upbringings, they play a big role in shaping our beliefs about the afterlife. And those beliefs, they can influence the kind of NDEs we have. It's like wearing a pair of tinted glasses. The world might look a little different depending on the color of your lenses. So if you grew up hearing nothing but sunshine and rainbows about the afterlife, well, it stands to reason that your NDE might be a little more pleasant than someone who grew up thinking the Grim Reaper was going to challenge him to a fiddle contest. It's all about expectations, folks. And when it comes to the afterlife, our expectations, they can be as powerful as a mama bear protecting her cubs. Now let's talk about memory. That fickle friend that's always playing tricks on us, like hiding our car keys when we're already running late. See, our memories, they ain't as reliable as we like to think they are. They're more like a game of telephone, with details getting twisted and turned with each retelling. And when it comes to NDEs, well, our memories can be even more slippery than a greased pig at a county fair. See, researchers, they've found that our brains, they tend to hold on to positive memories more tightly than negative ones. It's like our brains are curating a highlight reel of our lives, editing out the boring bits and focusing on the good times. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, don't it? Who wants to walk around remembering every awkward encounter, every embarrassing moment, every time they tripped over their own 2 feet? Not me, that's for sure. So, when it comes to NDEs, some folks, they figure that this tendency to focus on the positive might be why so many folks come back with stories of love, light, and heavenly reunions. It's like our brains are giving us a rose-colored goodbye, a final farewell tour of all the good stuff before we clock out. Like those old family photos where your mama used to airbrush out your acne and give you a more flattering hairdo. It's all about remembering the best parts and leaving the rest to gather dust in the attics of our minds. Now hold on to your hats, folks, because we're about to get a little philosophical here. See, some people, they believe that our thoughts, they're not just fleeting notions that flit through our brains like fireflies on a summer night. They believe that our thoughts, they have power, that they can influence our reality, shape our experiences, and maybe even determine our eternal destiny. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hold your horses, Billy. You're starting to sound like one of them new age gurus who charges people money to hug trees. But hear me out on this one. See, there's a whole school of thought out there called the law of attraction. And these people, they believe that like attracts like. In other words, if you focus on the positive, you're more likely to attract positive experiences into your life. And if you focus on the negative, well, let's just say you better get used to eating crow, because you're going to be serving up a whole lot of apologies. Now, some folks, they apply this law of attraction to the afterlife too. They figure that if you go through life expecting a heavenly reward, well, you're more likely to end up at a celestial potluck than someone who spent their days dwelling on their sins and fretting about eternal damnation. It's like the difference between ordering a pizza with all the toppings and ordering one with just cheese. You get what you ask for. Nobody is saying that you can just wish your way into heaven. But I do believe that our thoughts, they have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. If you go through life expecting the worst, well, you're likely to find it. But if you choose to focus on the good, to cultivate gratitude, and to spread a little kindness wherever you go, well, who knows? You just might find yourself on the fast track to a heavenly hoedown. And wouldn't that be something? Well, we've spent a good bit of time basking in the warm glow of those positive NDEs, those heavenly vacations that leave folks grinning like a possum eating a sweet potato. But now, it's time to grab your nightlights and hold on tight. Because we're about to venture into the shadowy side of the NDE street, where the streetlights are dim, the owls hoot a little louder, and the only banana pudding you'll find is probably curdled. Now, I'm not gonna lie, these negative NDEs, they are not for the faint of heart. They're the kind of stories that make you want to sleep with the lights on, double-check the locks on your doors, and maybe invest in a good exorcism kit just in case. But hey, even in the darkest of nights, there's always something to learn. Even if it's just how to face our fears head-on like a fearless squirrel staring down a garden hose. So if you're brave enough to join me on this journey into the heart of NDE darkness, well then saddle up, partners, and let's ride. Just remember, I'm not responsible for any lost sleep, sudden urges to call your mama, or unexpected encounters with shadowy figures wearing fedoras. It's all part of the adventure, folks, and adventure, well, it isn't always pretty, but it's always interesting. Get ready for a wild ride. We're about to explore the dark side of the NDE moon, and trust me, it's a sight you won't soon forget, even if you try to drown it out with a gallon of sweet tea and a year's supply of pecan pie. Are you ready? Let's do it. Now, one of the biggest differences between those happy-go-lucky positive NDEs and their gloomier counterparts is the whole fear factor. See, those positive NDEs, they're like a warm hug from your grandma, all love and light and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. But these negative NDEs, well, they're more like that time you accidentally stepped on a rake and it whacked you in the face. Painful, unexpected, and likely to leave you a little wary of anything remotely resembling a garden tool. See, people who have negative NDEs, they often talk about feeling intense fear, like that heart-in-your-throat kind of fear that makes you want to turn tail and run for the hills, or at least hide under the covers until the sun comes up. It's like they've stumbled onto the set of a horror movie, only this time there ain't no director yelling, "Cut!" And this fear, it ain't just your run-of-the-mill, "I'm afraid of spiders" kind of fear. No, sir, this is deep-seated existential dread. The kind of fear that makes you question everything you thought you knew about life, the universe, and maybe even the existence of your own socks. It's enough to make a fella want to swear off mystery novels, horror movies, and maybe even bedtime stories just to be on the safe side. So, what causes this intense fear? Well, those brainy types and those soul-searching shrinks, they've got a few theories ranging from chemical imbalances in the brain to, well, the possibility that we might be catching a glimpse of something truly terrifying, like the bottom of a dirty laundry hamper after a month-long vacation. Whatever the reason, one thing's for sure, negative NDEs are a stark reminder that the afterlife, well, it ain't always going to be a walk in the park. Even if that park's got a heavenly swing set and a never-ending supply of cotton candy. Now, speaking of terrifying things, let's talk about the HE double hockey sticks word, hell. See, when it comes to negative NDEs, hell, it isn't just a swear word you mutter under your breath when you stub your toe on the coffee table. No, sir. For some folks, hell, it's a real place. And they've got the NDE scars to prove it. They come back from the brink talking about fire and brimstone, lakes of fire, and enough demonic activity to make a preacher faint. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I died and ended up in a place that was hotter than a jalapeno pepper eating contest in August, well, let's just say I'd be looking for the nearest exit, even if it meant having to ask directions from a demon with a pitchfork. But hey, that's just me. Maybe some people, they like it hot. Maybe they're the kind of folks who order their chili with extra ghost peppers and think a sauna is a pleasant way to spend an afternoon. But all jokes aside, these hellish NDEs, they paint a pretty grim picture of the afterlife. Kind of like that time you accidentally left a casserole in the oven too long, and it turned into a charred, smoking mess. Folks talk about feeling unbearable heat, seeing grotesque creatures, and experiencing a sense of despair so deep, it'd make a well of tears look like a puddle after a light rain. Now, are these hellish visions real? Are they just a figment of our overactive imaginations, fueled by years of fire and brimstone sermons and those creepy paintings of demons playing poker that your grandma used to have hanging in her parlor? Well, that's a question for the ages, folks, and one that's got theologians and philosophers scratching their heads since, well, probably since the first caveman accidentally set his loincloth on fire. But one thing's for sure, these hellish NDEs, they're a stark reminder that the afterlife, well, it might not be all harps and halos. And that's enough to make even the most devout believer double-check their moral compass. Now, if there's one figure who's synonymous with negative NDEs, it's got to be the head honcho of hell himself, the devil. You know the guy, red horns, pointy tail, a penchant for fiddling, and a smile that could curdle milk. And let me tell you, folks, when it comes to NDEs, the devil, he don't just make a cameo appearance. No, sir, he goes all out, like a one-man show in the theater of your nightmares. Folks who've had these devilish encounters, they describe him in all sorts of ways. Some say he's a suave and sophisticated gentleman, all charm and charisma, like a used car salesman trying to close a deal on your soul. Others, they say he's more like that creepy uncle who shows up at family reunions, the one with the shifty eyes and the questionable hygiene habits. But no matter what form he takes, one thing's for sure. The devil, he ain't there to offer you a plate of cookies and a glass of sweet tea. No, sir, he's got an agenda, and that agenda usually involves tempting you, tricking you, or just plain old scaring the bejeebers out of you. It's like he's auditioning for a role in a horror movie, and he's determined to win an award for most convincing portrayal of pure evil. Now, are these devil encounters real? Or are they just our brains playing tricks on us, conjuring up images of our deepest fears and insecurities, like a projector screen displaying all our worst childhood nightmares? Well, that's a question for the philosophers and the theologians, folks, and maybe for a good therapist, too. But one thing's for sure, these devilish NDEs, they're enough to make a fella think twice about straying from the straight and narrow, even if that straight and narrow path is paved with potholes and lined with temptation. Now, for some folks, those hellish visions, they ain't the scariest part of a negative NDE. No, sir, for some people, the most terrifying NDEs are the ones where they feel like they're drowning, suffocating, trapped in a watery grave with no escape. It's like being stuck in a nightmare version of that old swimming hole, only this time there ain't no mama to throw you a life preserver. Folks who've had these drowning NDEs, they talk about feeling like they can't breathe, like their lungs are being crushed under the weight of 1,000 oceans. They describe the sensation of water filling their mouths, their noses, their ears, until it feels like their whole body's about to explode. It's enough to make a fella swear off bath time, rainstorms, and maybe even those little goldfish crackers just in case. Now, why would someone experience something so terrifying during an NDE? Well, those shrink types, they reckon it might have something to do with our primal fears, those deep-seated anxieties that are wired into our DNA, like a fear of snakes, spiders, or that creepy crawling sensation you get when you think someone's walking on your grave. See, drowning, it's one of those things that scared humans for centuries. It's a primal fear, a reminder of our own mortality, and a symbol of feeling trapped and helpless. So when we're facing death, it makes sense that our brains, they might tap into that primal fear, even if we're not actually anywhere near water. It's like our brains are saying, look, I know this whole dying thing is scary, so how about we just cut to the chase and imagine the worst possible scenario? Just to be prepared, you know? Thanks, brain, but I think I'll pass on the whole drowning simulation. I'd rather take my chances with a plate of cold grits and a lukewarm glass of sweet tea. At least I can breathe while I'm eating those. Now, for some, the most terrifying part of a negative NDE isn't the fire, the brimstone, or even the devil himself. No, sir, for some people, the scariest thing is the overwhelming sense of loneliness, of being completely alone in the vast emptiness of the universe, like a sock lost in the dryer of eternity. It's the kind of loneliness that makes you want to call up your ex, just to have someone to talk to, even if that someone is the reason you're single in the first place. Folks who've had these lonely NDEs, they talk about feeling a sense of isolation so profound, it's like being trapped in a sensory deprivation tank. Only instead of being surrounded by lukewarm water, you're surrounded by nothingness. No light, no sound, no sense of time or space, just the echo of your own thoughts bouncing around your head like a bad country song stuck on repeat. It's enough to make a fella crave a hug, a conversation, even a good old-fashioned argument, just to break the monotony of all that silence. Now, this sense of isolation, it can be particularly troubling for folks who are already prone to feeling lonely or abandoned. It's like their worst fears. They're being projected onto the big screen of the afterlife. Only this time, there ain't no intermission and no escape from those uncomfortable theater seats. It's enough to make a fella want to join every social club, book club, and bingo night within a 100-mile radius, just to avoid ever feeling that alone again. So, what causes this feeling of cosmic loneliness? Well, those deep thinkers, they're not quite sure yet. Some say it's our brain's way of processing the trauma of death. Kind of like how we might withdraw and isolate ourselves after a painful breakup or a particularly bad haircut. Others, they say it might be a glimpse into the void, the nothingness that exists beyond the veil of reality. Kind of like peeking behind the curtain of the universe and realizing there ain't no wizard, just a bunch of wires and smoke machines. Now, speaking of the void, let's talk about one of the most peculiar and downright unsettling phenomena reported in negative NDEs, the void experience. Folks who've had these void experiences, they describe it as a place of utter nothingness, a cosmic black hole where all light, sound, and even thought itself goes to die. It's like being trapped inside a sensory deprivation tank that's been cranked up to 11. Only this time, there ain't no escape hatch and no one to hear you scream. Whatever the reason, those void experiences, they're a stark reminder that the afterlife, well, it isn't always going to be a party. But hey, that's what makes it an adventure, right? Now I know what you're thinking. This is getting a little too spooky for my taste. Can't we just go back to talking about pecan pie and those happy-go-lucky angels? And hey, I hear you. I'm not exactly looking forward to bumping into the devil at the grocery store anytime soon. But here's the thing about these negative NDEs. As terrifying as they can be, they also offer a unique opportunity for growth and self-discovery. It's like that time you finally cleaned out your closet and realized you had enough skeletons in there to start a marching band. It ain't pretty, but it's a chance to confront your past and move forward with a clean slate, or at least a clean closet. See, those negative NDEs, they often force us to confront our deepest fears, our regrets, and those pesky, unresolved issues we've been trying to sweep under the rug of our subconscious. It's like having a therapy session with the universe itself. Only this time, you can't just fake a headache and leave early. And while that might not sound like a whole lot of fun, it can actually be incredibly liberating. Because once you've stared down your demons, once you've faced your fears head on, well, nothing else seems quite as scary anymore. It's like that time you finally rode that roller coaster you'd been avoiding for years and realized it wasn't nearly as terrifying as you'd built it up to be in your head. So if you or someone you know has had a negative NDE, don't shy away from it. Talk about it, process it, and allow it to teach you something about yourself and your place in the grand scheme of things. Because sometimes the most profound growth comes from the darkest of places, kind of like those mushrooms that grow in the depths of the forest. They might not be the prettiest things to look at, but they sure pack a punch. Well, folks, we've been on a wild ride today, haven't we? From the pearly gates of heaven to the fiery depths of, well, we've explored the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre when it comes to near-death experiences. And while we might not have all the answers, one thing's for sure, NDEs, they're a powerful reminder that there's still a whole lot we don't know about life, the universe, and everything in between. It's like peeking behind the curtain of a magic show, only to realize that the real magic was happening all along, right there in front of our eyes. See, these NDEs, they're like little cracks in the cosmic egg, offering us a peek at something bigger than ourselves. Whether you believe they're a genuine glimpse into the afterlife, a wild hallucination, or something in between, there's no denying the profound impact they have on the people who experience them. The world, it's full of surprises, even when those surprises involve tunnels of light, heavenly choirs, and maybe even a chat with the big man himself. Now, you don't have to go chasing after an NDE like it's a runaway prize hog at the county fair, but I do think it's important to keep an open mind about these things. Because in the grand scheme of things, isn't that what life's all about? Now, I know what you're thinking. You've been rambling on about these NDEs for an hour now, and I still don't know what to believe. And hey, I don't blame you one bit. Because when it comes to NDEs, there isn't any easy answers, no definitive proof, no cosmic instruction manual that lays it all out in plain English. It's like trying to figure out how many licks it takes to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop. You can ask the owl, you can conduct scientific experiments, but in the end, you're still going to be left with more questions than answers. See, belief, it isn't like flipping a light switch. It's more like tending a garden. You got to plant the seeds, water them, give them a little sunshine, and be patient. Some things, they just take time to grow, and belief, well, it's one of those things. So if you're wrestling with whether to believe in NDEs or not, well, join the club. We've got plenty of sweet tea and pecan pie to go around. But here's the thing. Whether you believe in NDEs or not, it doesn't change the fact that they're happening. People are having these experiences. They're coming back changed, and they're sharing their stories with the world. And those stories, they matter. They make us think, they make us question, and they make us wonder if there's more to this life than meets the eye. So to believe or not to believe, that's up to you folks. But whatever you do, don't let the mystery die. Keep asking questions, keep searching for answers, and keep an open mind. Embracing the unknown life, death, and the great cosmic hoedown. Now, I know this whole talk about the afterlife, it can be a little heavy, kind of like eating a whole pecan pie by yourself. You might feel a little full, a little overwhelmed, and maybe even a little scared. And that's all right, folks. It's natural to be afraid of the unknown, to cling to the familiar, to wish for a cosmic roadmap that tells us exactly where we're going and what to expect when we get there. But here's the thing. Life ain't about knowing all the answers, about having it all figured out. It's about embracing the unknown, about taking risks, about dancing with the unexpected. See, life, it's like a big old cosmic hoedown, and we're all just trying to find our partners, learn the steps, and avoid stepping on each other's toes. There's gonna be times when we're twirling under the disco ball, feeling footloose and fancy-free. And there's gonna be times when we trip over our own 2 feet, land flat on our backsides, and wonder why we even bothered putting on our dancing boots in the first place. But the important thing is to keep moving, folks, to keep laughing, and to keep an open mind, because you never know who you might bump into on the dance floor, what new steps you might learn, or what kind of crazy, beautiful music the cosmic band's gonna strike up next. So here's to embracing the unknown, to living life to the fullest, and to never taking ourselves too seriously, even when we're talking about matters of life and death. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground today, and some of it might have been a mite heavy, kind of like eating a double-stuffed pecan pie after a Thanksgiving feast. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with one last thought. Don't forget to laugh. I know, it might seem a little disrespectful to crack jokes about death, the afterlife, and the eternal destiny of our souls, but hear me out on this one, folks. See, laughter, it's a powerful thing. It's a reminder that even in the face of the unknown, there's still joy to be found, there's still humor to be shared. It's like that time you accidentally wore mismatched socks to a funeral and realized that, hey, even in the midst of grief and sorrow, life's still full of little absurdities. So, if you find yourself fretting about the afterlife, about whether you'll be wearing a halo or a pitchfork, just remember, laughter, it's the best medicine, even for a bad case of the cosmic blues. Because even in the afterlife, folks, I guarantee you one thing, there's going to be plenty to laugh about. And who knows, maybe the big man upstairs, he's got a sense of humor too. After all, he did create the platypus, didn't he? So, lighten up, folks, and don't be afraid to find the humor in the hereafter. If you would like to explore NDEs more, there are some very good channels on the subject. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe, and thanks for watching.